Hey, what's up? It's me, Jenny V, here with another video for you. Tonight we're going to talk about a ghost town that is on fire and has been on fire for 60 years. The town is in Pennsylvania and the town's name is Centralia. So let's get into it. So how the town came about was in 1749, the Indians auctioned off a bunch of land to the colonials. And in 1793, Robert Morris bought it, but lost it just 5 years later due to bankruptcy. After the bankruptcy, Stephen Girard then bought the land for about $30,000, which was a steal. So Stephen Girard had the land surveyed, and what he had found out was that there was a large natural deposit of anthracite coal underneath of this land. And so if he could make a business out of that, the land had a lot of opportunities and, potential. Apparently, Pennsylvania makes up 3/4 of the world's anthracite coal, and it's the purest form of coal, is what I read. In 1832, Jonathan Foss opened the first tavern in the area, and it was called Bull's Head Tavern. Now, Jonathan Foss is an interesting character because he never actually owned any land in this town. He opened up that first tavern, and then the town became established. People started hanging out there. People started building houses and living in the area, and so they unofficially called it Bull's Head, was the first name of Centralia. At this time, in 1842, the land was acquired by Locust Mountain Coal and Iron Company, and they had placed Alexander Ray there as the drilling master, and it was Alexander Ray who really established the town. He set up the roads and the streets and the geographical aspects of the town itself, and then filed for a name with the state. And the first name that he filed for was Centerville, but the Schuylkill County in Pennsylvania already had dibs on that name, so he ended up going with Centralia. It was under his authority that the town was really established, and he started drawing in more and more citizens by the promise of work because of the coal mines he was intending to open and establish and get a big booming business going in this town. And so he had a lot of attraction for work from immigrants, locals, anyone really who was looking for work at the time. But a lot of it, from what I read, was a lot of Irish immigrants. And that's important to know for later on in the story. So the town's official name became Centralia in 1865. In 1868, the mines began to open. Over time, there was eventually 14 active mines in this town. And in that same year, 1868, the guy that really established the town filed for the name and, was the true founder of Centralia. He was murdered in his buggy coming from Mount Carmel back down to Centralia, and he was murdered by a local gang that would frequent that Bull's Head Tavern that I previously mentioned. Apparently, it was a seedy hangout spot for the lower class of people that didn't mind violence and doing what needed to be done to get their point across for whatever it was that they were after. And that one of the gangs that hung out at the tavern was called the Molly Maguires. Now, when I looked up Molly Maguires and everything about them, what I found out was that it was a secret society of outlaws willing to do what it took to stand up for the common working miners, made up of mostly Irish immigrants. Molly Maguires got their name from an Irish lady back in Ireland that had stood up against landlords for, tenant rights. So, but the Molly Maguires was majority made up of men, this gang that murdered Alexander Ray. It was October 17th, 1868, the same year that the mines really got going, really got started and was, heading in the right direction. Alexander never got to see it come to fruition. Some said that he was murdered because the gang thought he was holding money on him that he was picking up because he was a landlord and he was on his way back from collecting, the rents and, the payments from his tenants. But that wasn't the case. They didn't actually have any money on him, most of the stories said. But then others say that the gang murdered Alexander Ray because, again, remember, Alexander Ray was the drilling master of the mining company that owned this town. And so if the Molly Maguires were the type of gang that was standing up for miners' rights and, going in that direction, then they would have wanted to murder Alexander Ray because of his role with the mining companies, and they were trying to stand up to the man, stand up to the authority. I don't know if I wrote this down in all of my notes, but I know I read a story that said the Molly Maguires were the ones that really established unions, like a coal miners union. And at some point the union had a strike. They didn't want to work in the conditions. They didn't want to work for the little bit of pay that they were getting to do the mining jobs. And so they went on strike, and a lot of crimes were happening during this strike. So when the strike was over and people were going back to work, a lot of men of the Molly Maguires were held responsible for the crimes that were committed during the strike. And so I think about 10 of them were hanged for those crimes. And it was after that happened that the Molly Maguires really lost their power. But they left their lasting mark on Centralia, especially its, beginnings of the stories. And a little creepy side note to all of that, some say that when they visited Centralia, that the ghost of Alexander Ray condemns anyone who visits and laughs at his folly, because it would be him that established the coal mines and set up the town and wanted it to be like this booming business, which ultimately would be the downfall of this entire town. In its heyday, Centralia had about 2,500 residents, and that was in 1890. And it dwindled down to about 1,000 in 1980, and just 4 people remain living there as of 2020. Now, as the story goes on, you'll figure out why those numbers were so drastically changed over time. It's considered a ghost town, but not a ghost town in the sense of paranormal exploring, if you understand what I'm saying. It's a ghost town in the sense that there used to be a whole entire thriving town in this place, and if you were to go there today, it's gone. Like, it is gone. The remnants of the buildings can barely be found. So unless you see pictures or you know someone who lived there or hear the stories, you would never even really know that there was a town there. There's, I think, maybe the 4 houses for the residents that still live there, maybe a couple of other buildings. But when you look at the early pictures of Centralia and what it was compared to what it is now, it is truly a ghost town. There is no town where there was once a big, thriving town. There were some stories that said, like, when people go there, they feel very uneasy. So obviously, with the history of this town and how it goes back to the 1800s, there's bound to be ghosts there. So don't get me wrong, it is a ghost town in many senses. But when I say ghost town, I mean there was a town, then there wasn't a town. And the reason why is baffling, because the way that the story unfolds just gets you. The town is about 154 acres, and by 1960, almost all the coal mines had been abandoned, and town began its true downfall. Although it was never really clear in any of the stories that I was looking up and reading into why all of the mines became abandoned, because there was clearly plenty of coal still left down there. I want to say that it probably started happening when automobiles became more popular and people weren't using trains and things that required coal to fuel them. So the need for coal went down, and then that would be why so many mines were abandoned. Um, but that was the start of the downfall for Centralia, because once the coal wasn't being mined anymore, a lot of people started to leave the town, and this is where the numbers begin to dwindle. By this point, the town had been around for a couple hundred years. People had been born here, grew up here, died here, were buried here, all over that time. And that's important to understand for later in the story, and to understand why some of these residents are so attached to that town. It's not like this was a new town that something bad happened and let's get up and go start somewhere else. That was not the case. This town had been established and had been around for hundreds of years before what took place in 1962. On May 27th, 1962, they were preparing for their town Memorial Day festivities. The state had passed laws about illegal landfills. And so all around Centralia, there were a bunch of illegal landfills that they weren't allowed to have anymore. And so what the fire department and the town municipality did was they went around and collected all of the trash from all of these different illegal little landfills, and they put it into a crater of what was an abandoned mine at one point. And their intention was to clean it up for the holiday festivities, to kick the summer off right, and just clean up their town in general. And then where this new landfill was, the crater, the old mine that they had dug out and put all the trash into to get rid of it, was kind of near a lot like cemeteries and churches and stuff in the town, and the stench from the trash was atrocious. And so before they would get complaints, before the state would come out and give them any fines for the amount of trash they had or anything, they wanted to get it cleaned up, and Memorial Day was the fantastic reason to do that. And so the fire department planned to do a controlled fire, which they had done plenty of times before when they had all of these illegal dump sites. They wanted to turn it all to ash and rid the town of the eyesore, and obviously avoid the stench that would come from the rotting trash. The state had also passed laws to not do dump fires, but this was the quickest and easiest and cheapest way for Centralia to get rid of their trash. And so that's what they were going to do. And they had, like I said, they had done it a bunch of times before. So they thought that they knew what they were doing, and everything was under control. It was this that started the fire that continues to burn today. So that night they lit the fire. They burned all of the trash down to ash, and it was smoldering and smoking through the night. And then they doused it out at the end of the night with a bunch of water to put the fire out. And the fire went out from what they could see, and 2 days later, there were flames again. So again, the fire department comes out and they douse it with water, and they get the flames out, and they think that the fire is out. And then a week goes by, and the same thing happens again. Flames started to appear, and the fire had reignited, and people are starting to wonder what is going on here. So again, the fire department comes out and they douse it with water, and they put the flames out, and they think that the fire is all the way out. At this point, they're moving around the ash at the bottom, trying to get to the embers that may still be lit underneath. And it's at this point that they realize that there was a hole in the wall of that crater, and that hole led to an old vein of coal, and that trash fire had lit that vein. And now the fire was spreading 300 feet under the town. Slowly, but it was spreading. Because again, this town sat on top of a huge deposit of anthracite coal. What the town did next actually will shock you. And it's controversial all the way around. The fire itself is not visible from the surface. It is 300 feet below the surface. This fire burns below the ground and has been burning slowly ever since 1962. It has burned over about an 8-mile stretch so far and could continue to burn for another 250 years. Again, like I had said before, they abandoned the coal mines, but there was still plenty of coal down there. And so this fire has nothing but fuel to just keep on spreading and keep on spreading. Um, for 10 years, the town downplayed the significance of the fire to the residents until the fumes were so bad that it was emitting became extremely hazardous for them. Carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide poisoning was in the air from this fire underneath the town, and it was seeping up through the grounds and through buckled roads, and wherever it could get out, it was getting out. Um, but so the town was trying to they had downplayed it for 10 years before anyone really started to get sick or think anything or, say, make a fuss of it. Um, Even when people started to get sick, the town actually still remained silent about this. The current mayor is Lamar Mivner, and what he had said is if it had been addressed within the first 2 weeks that it had happened and been tried to be put out within the first 2 weeks that it had went down, it would have cost less than $1,000 to extinguish the fire. But since the government or the town was trying to cover it up and downplay it and didn't want to admit what they had done, started the fire, and they were going through all of the politics, filing the paperwork, getting the permits, notifying people, waiting for approvals, getting the money together, seeing what they could do to get the fire out. Meanwhile, the fire is under the town just spreading every day, spreading, spreading, spreading. And they're just taking their good old time trying to figure out what they're going to do about this. So long that 10 years had passed and people started to finally get sick from the poisonous fumes that were coming from the fire. And they still didn't do anything about it. Now at this point, in 1984, they said it would have cost $660 million to get the fire out. That was in 1984. The fire started in 1962. They waited that long to really take it seriously and to make major attempts to try to get the fire out. The $660 million in 1984 would be equivalent to about $2 billion today. Instead of putting out that money to excavate or do whatever it took to get the fire put out, the government passed a bill to provide funds for the residents to relocate. And I think the bill passed was like $42 million that they had to get the residents that lived in this town to relocate to a new town. But this really split the town in two. Half of the residents wanted to leave. They just wanted, buy my house, I will go live somewhere else. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Enough is enough. But then the other half, who despised the half that wanted to leave, wanted to stay in their town. Their families lived here. Their grandchildren lived here. People that they loved were buried here. Like their families owned homes that had been in the family for hundreds of years at this point. And so they didn't want to leave. They wanted the government to spend the money to fix the place. But as it turns out, even if the government had put out the $660 million to extinguish the fire under Centralia, they would have had to rip up straight down the center of town. And it would have ruined the town anyway. So no matter what, it was either ruin the town or get everyone to leave and let it be. Some people decided to leave. In 1984, most sold their homes for way under value to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They were given valuations of their home, and then the government came in way under what they were told that their home was worth. And the way that I read it was that they had the $47 million to distribute throughout the town for anyone who wanted to leave. So realtors came in, did evaluations on the home, told everyone what their home was worth and what they could get for it. And then the government came in and they went from house to house, basically making an offer. And it was significantly lower than what the valuation of the house was from the realtor. some people were, insulted by this and didn't want to take less than what they thought their house was worth. But basically what the government said, this is the offer, take it or leave it. If you won't, your neighbors will, and eventually you'll be the only one here. But this is a one-time offer, take it or leave it, because we won't come back. And so people either panicked and sold and left, or people made the harsh decision and said, well, I'm staying. So that's what it really came down to. It was around this time that part of Route 61 that ran through the town had buckled and cracked from all the pressure of the fire, and fumes and gases started bellowing out from the cracks and the holes that were being created on this part of Route 61. And it was about a mile stretch of Route 61 that we're talking about here. And so in the 1980s, it was repaired and they continued to use this road through the town. But by the 90s, it was far too expensive to keep repairing this highway, and so they just shut it down and rerouted Route 61 in a different direction and closed off that mile stretch of highway that was buckling in Centralia because of the fire. This portion of Route 61 became very famous, and they called it the Graffiti Highway. Graffiti Highway was the most iconic section of American highway until it was covered in 2020. It's a 1-mile stretch of old Route 61 south side of the town. It became an attraction for all kinds of people who would come visit and leave their mark on the road. Now, this stretch of the highway was by 2020, completely covered in graffiti. Lots of different arts, appropriate and inappropriate. Just tons of different things to see, and so it attracted a lot of people who wanted to witness Centralia and everything that the history had to offer. And then they also wanted to see the infamous Graffiti Highway, and people wanted to also leave their mark as well. So when 2020 rolled around and the coronavirus hit and everyone was on lockdown, people were going stir crazy. And so when people wanted to get out of their house, they needed to go to a place where there wasn't going to be a lot of people. What better than an abandoned ghost town with such a history at that? Something really fascinating to do. So that's what a lot of people were doing in 2020. And sources say the town shuns all opportunities of tourism, lodging many complaints about the vandals destroying their town. So the remaining residents that still lived in Centralia, all 4 people by 2020, didn't like that people were coming. They didn't like that people were leaving their mark, destroying the highway, or just in their town at all. So they would call up and complain to the state or to whoever was the owner at the time. So in 2018, so in 2018, before 2020 even happened, Pennsylvania Department of Transportation vacated its ownership of the road, and it reverted back to the adjacent property owners. The new owners got sick of the locals' complaints and the liabilities of it all, that they decided to cover the highway to deter visitors. And so this is when they began dumping large mounds of dirt just on the highway. It's not like paved out where you could drive on it. It's not nice and neat. It's literally pile after pile after pile after pile of just dirt covering this highway so that you can no longer see even a shred of the graffiti that used to be there. I had heard about Centralia because I am originally from New Jersey, and so we did a lot of weird New Jersey type stuff. And a friend of mine had once mentioned Centralia and that she had been there and she had seen Graffiti Highway, and she would say how eerie the town was and that you would get a weird feeling while you were there, like you were being watched. And some people had, in the stories I was reading online, had said that they had heard voices or seen like shadows. And again, like I said, people thought that Alexander Ray would condemn anyone who came to the town, to laugh at the fact that he found a town full of coal, and it was the coal that basically ended up destroying the town. Now, it's completely legal to visit Centralia, but it is not the kind of ghost town that, like I said, like you would expect to see. There's literally nothing there except for the few houses and a couple of buildings. There's not even the Graffiti Highway to go look at anymore. But all you will see is the hillsides with these smokestacks trying to ventilate all the fumes from underneath. And so the roads are buckled and cracked, and there's sinkholes here, there, and everywhere. It's very dangerous, and there's tons of signs saying that the fumes that are coming up are poisonous and it's dangerous, and they don't really, you know, suggest that people go there, but people do go there. It's not illegal. In 2013, an agreement was reached with the state that declared eminent domain over the entire town, and whomever lives there is merely allowed to remain because the state has not yet forced them to leave. So basically, the 4 remaining residents that live there don't own their house anymore. They can't leave it to anyone. They don't pay for it. I think they only pay like the property tax or something. And so technically, the houses in all of Centralia is now owned by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I think it was in 2002 that the post office actually took away the zip code, officially declaring that Centralia was no longer a town in the state of Pennsylvania. And so basically this land, not even a town anymore, this land is now owned by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and they allow the 4 remaining residents to stay living there. One, because they're old and it would be bad publicity for them to uproot a 75-year-old man out of his house when, you know, he had lived there his whole life. So they're just allowing the residents to stay, and when those residents pass on, the town will demolish the last few buildings that are there, and they will just continue to let the fire burn. There apparently is no intention of putting out the fire at all. A lot of the stories were saying that people think that Centralia is the gateway to hell because underneath the ground it is on fire. And like I said, other people say that they feel like they're being watched when they're there, that they hear voices, that they see things, and that they leave, which is the very uneasy feeling about the entire experience. And the fun fact is that this is only one of 38 active coal fires in Pennsylvania. Talk about a town on fire. It's crazy. Many sources said that the film and video game Silent Hill was loosely based on Centralia. I haven't personally seen it, but I think I might check it out just because I always found Centralia, its history, and the whole story to be very fascinating because I'm from that area. I wish that I had taken the time to go and visit it before I moved away, but one day at a time. Someday I'll get there. If any of you live in the area, you get to snooping around, let me know what you find out. Let me know how you feel if you come across anything cool. And that's going to be it for this video. And let me know what you guys want me to cover next. And we're just going to keep it moving. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.